leave the webinar like you did last time, Arik. Welcome to social media. Glad you're here. Привет, российская сеть работов, as we like to say. All right, Derek, you ready? All right, here we go. Welcome, everyone, to the next edition of the Running Into the Fog podcast with the Johnson brothers, Derek and Arik Johnson. Derek, how you doing today?
Pretty good, pretty good. Got a new hat here.
That is a slick hat, I will have to say. What does it say on it?
Well, let me get close enough so you can see.
Yep.
It says, it's got the 3 bars and it says SCIP.
SCIP, what does that stand for?
Well, you know, this is where we might get into a little territory that is what I still see it as standing for, but I know that that's not the actual name anymore. Take it for what it's worth. You know, I come from a place where societies and associations do things like throwing rock concerts, and for the just the opportunity to kind of bring everybody together and some fellowship and togetherness around, you know, interesting activities and stuff. So rock concerts, even SCIP Olympics. You know, I still have my medal. It's not handy where I can grab it. But the Society of Competitive Intelligence Professionals is what I'm calling it, at least in the first half of our time together.
Yep, which it was known as for probably 20 years or a little more before the first name changed to Strategic and Competitive Intelligence Professional. That was at least 10 years ago, must be.
Right around there. Mm-hmm.
And then more recently, well, we'll keep everyone in suspense for the new branding and the positioning statement and whatnot. Welcome, though. You are getting a SCIP trip report from the Johnson brothers today for the first time in a while. We haven't done one of these in a long time. But we had a few key takeaways, I'd say it was safe to say, from the meeting last week, and we'll be sharing those. We are, in this first 30 minutes, doing our unthinkable routine. That's where Derek and I share what we thought of SCIP. And then the second half is unspeakable, and that's when all of you in the audience, if you're on the webinar bridge at least, can join in the fun and tell us if you would like to join the panel. We've already got Elise as a volunteer. Ideally, if you were in Scottsdale, it'd be really nice for those actual, you know, physical in situ witnesses to what went on in Scottsdale would be part of that effort in the back half. So Phil Britton, I see you out there. Who else is out there? We got, who was there? We got, well, Jay Nakagawa is out there. Jay, let's get you as a witness to what went on. Jason Liu, you were there. It was great to meet you finally, Jason, by the way. I don't think I'm missing anybody from that list other than Elise. So yeah, get ready to join us and share your key takeaways in the back half when we get to Unspeakable. We'll probably cut a little bit early today. And we are streaming to social. You'll see on your screen a QR code. That is the proof of attendance protocol. Swearing is allowed in the second half, Elise. Yes, very good. Glad you remembered that. And so scan that POAP, redeem your QR code for some privileges later on. And we've got kind of a record turnout here of attendees today, Derek. This is a hot topic. So
seems to be. I've never seen, you know, we've been doing a lot of these. I think this is technically episode 66 or something in that ballpark of Running Into the Fog, and I don't think we've ever gotten close to 27 live attendees. But
we've got several dozen on social, but it's good to have you all here. Thank you all for being here. Well, I have a first key takeaway, if you don't mind me sharing, Derek. Is that all right?
Let her roll. What you got?
Well, my first key takeaway is that you better be drinking when you go to SCIP. And in the case of the Johnson brothers, this is us on the plane. The afternoon of our trip out there, we were cracking some beers, and I think we were pretty productive, weren't we? We did, as I recall, we put together a pretty interesting presentation, and maybe, you know, that's among your key takeaways. But not only were you drinking on the way out there, after the meeting is over with, you better be prepared to keep drinking so that you can get yourself home. And this is the bookend shot from the back half of the meeting. So that's my first key takeaway, Derek, is drink.
Yep. We didn't get too wild and crazy, keeping in mind we were flying an airline we hadn't flown in quite a long time. Maybe my first time. I know you'd flown Sun Country several times, but there was this really interesting direct flight from Madison to Phoenix. Almost unheard of to get direct almost anywhere out of Madison, right? But the flight attendants were coming around. They moved us to a different row, and all this stuff. So we got a few beers. We worked on our deck, and I would say we were incredibly productive, all given the circumstances. No doubt.
Right on. What deck was that, Derek? Remind me what we talked about when we were there.
So that deck was titled, what if you could intentionally live, what advantages would you have if you could intentionally live to both the missionary and the mercenary mindsets? And so then we took that deck and we obviously had our 90-minute learning lab on Tuesday last week. That's one of my highlights, is just anytime I get an opportunity to kind of join forces with you, join arms, and bring this topic so central to what it means to be a Johnson brother, I think. And then the fact that we're working on this book together, getting pretty darn close to having a fully drafted manuscript of the book. In case you're curious, Arik and I have put eyes on chapter 10 draft yesterday morning. And again, with all humility, we are not authors. That's why we hired a pretty amazing ghostwriter named Wanda, otherwise also known as Casper, the friendly ghostwriter. And Casper is absolutely rocking it. Rocking in a way that you and I would never be capable of doing. So that learning lab was probably my highlight of last week.
Couldn't do it without you, Wanda, for sure. My second highlight, if you don't mind me sharing, is seeing old friends. And I hadn't seen Amir Fleischman in years, by the way. But this actually is a probably my third takeaway, which is that you, Derek, are the only one at that meeting that could make that hat look good. But you had to turn it around backwards, kind of frat boy style like that. That look works, I think, for that hat. And had I saved my hat, I might have worn mine the same way. But as evidence, here's another shot. There's me hatless, but with our good friends, August and Cynthia. And so seeing old friends, there's nothing like seeing old friends when you go to the SCIP meeting. That's actually one reason why I know many people go at all, is to see their old friends and colleagues.
Yeah, so Tuesday night last week, we actually had a dinner that our team kind of arranged, in a sense. And by my count, we had like 9 or 10 fellows at that table, which was really, really cool. Some of those that you see there in the pictures joined us. Others of you on the attendee list today were there. And for 20 years now, I've been going to SCIP, and yeah, it's great to learn. It's great to make new connections that might lead to something valuable down the road. But hands down, the greatest gift given to any of us for going to an environment like SCIP, I think, is just breaking bread with people of like mind who are taking ideally a long view toward seeing the future of the intelligence profession and community as something that's important to them, something that's that they're willing to invest in. And I know of people that actually reached into their personal pockets that did not have a corporate sponsorship, said a different way, to attend SCIP this year in Scottsdale. And those are the people that I really salute, from the standpoint of making an investment to be there that hits them personally.
In fact, Jay just commented that he paid his own way to get there. And Jay, our third volunteer for Interlocutor. So we got Elise, Phil, Jay, Joe McMahon. I know you're out there. Would you like to join the panel? We've got room for a fourth, I think, today. So just let us know. Otherwise, it's going to be Elise, Phil, and Jay. joining the panel. And Joe, say the word if you'd like to join us. Craig had a comment here a little bit ago. I was among the first 200 members of the original SCIP, joining 35 years ago, which is older than some of the people on this call, I'll remind you, Craig. I've seen it go through 4 name changes and at least 2 other strategic discussions about changing it. And Arthur, Craig, yep, me too, although I joined much later than you. Society of Competitor Intelligence Professionals, to competitive, to strategic, to the new one that forgets marketing and forgets competitors and now includes environmental, military, etc. So yeah, well said. So the new positioning statement for SCIP, I think, was probably my next takeaway, which is that it is the Intelligence Consortium for the betterment of people and planet. Do you know what that means, Derek?
I'm
you were
still
at the open keynote, right? Well, so I missed it. I was doing something else.
I have to admit, I showed up to the opening keynote about 40% of the way through it. I think that SCIP now stands for the Strategic Consortium of Intelligence Professionals, with maybe a tagline of for the betterment of people and planet. You know, there's a few different ways to look at this from the way I see it. Number one, you know, I'm grateful to Paul Santilli for stepping into the void. You know, somebody needed to step in there, or we would surely not have a SCIP at all. We wouldn't have had a meeting at all. We wouldn't have had the fellowship at all that we experienced last week. So from that lens, I'm grateful that Paul took the role. I think that my personal hypothesis is there's maybe a little too much early attention being placed on sort of new initiatives, and perhaps not enough on demonstrating member value that will allow the organization to reach some type of, you know, plateau without further erosion or confusion. You know, that might be initiated here through a name change this early, you know, in that process. But again, what do I know? I've only been going to SCIPs for 20 or so years.
By the way, this was your 20th SCIP, right?
It was my 20th, not counting the SCIPs.
What? I think 03 Anaheim, which by the way, Anaheim, but program-wise in terms of memorability, will this one be as memorable as 03 for you?
Well, I think you know the answer. So we just prior to this podcast, about 2 hours ago, we started a book chapter review with Casper, and we started to replay SCIP Anaheim 2003. And keeping in mind, how old was I back then? 20 off of 48, so let's call it, I was 28, 27, 28, and you know, didn't know anything at all about competitive intelligence. And you inserted a healthy dose of nepotism to say, hey, you know, at least I trust this guy. If he doesn't know anything at all about competitive intelligence, he can learn that, but I needed somebody I could trust. So we go to SCIP Anaheim. It's literally 7 or 8 days into my time here in a brand new space. My luggage got lost. That was an experience. And then show up to the general session. The opening keynote is somebody who I was really, really familiar with. I have to admit, I was a San Francisco 49ers fanboy as a young kid, despite living in Wisconsin, believe it or not. I'm not sure what I was thinking, but the keynote presenter that morning in Anaheim was Bill Walsh, who made famous the West Coast offense and kind of a different way of running an offensive scheme in the NFL. He was talking all about contingency planning and how to champion people. He's well known from the standpoint of a coaching tree, and kind of related to that, you know, I think what we're doing now, kind of in the, I don't know if you could say we're playing the back half of our time yet in CI. I know you would say we're just getting started.
I'm just getting started. Yeah.
But you know, we've been around long enough where maybe one of the greatest blessings you and I have is that we have had the chance to coach some people along the way. I'm not saying we've got this tremendous coaching tree yet, like Bill Walsh had, but that for me is a way to kind of liken what we heard back in '03 to some of what we're talking about here with regards to the book, especially chapter 10 champion, as we make every attempt to successfully dismount this book into something that's readable and entertaining.
So probably not as memorable. You're thinking of 23?
23 was probably not quite as memorable, but maybe ask me in 20 years.
All right, I'll wait. We'll see in 20 years whether the 43 it'll be is as memorable. Craig, first of all, Terry asked about demographics. Let's come to that. Average age on demographics. We'll get to that in a second. Craig mentions you just come onto the board in Anaheim 03. They just survived avoiding bankruptcy in 2001 by the skin of their teeth. They actually had outstanding debt of close to $1 million to John Wiley Publishing Company alone, and some smaller ones as well, which nearly sunk us. They negotiated deals to stay afloat. Well done, Craig. Phil shares, I'm 100% okay with woke if woke means not being an exclusionary jerk face. Sounds like you, Phil. However, I feel the new messaging is so dilute that our central reason for being as intelligence folks is lost. Well said. Well, we're going to get Elise and Phil and Jay on here in just a second. But here's my final word, me personally, on SCIP 2023. And I'm going to just take a stab first at Terry's demographic question. I think there were a lot of young people there. Now, that's actually a good thing, and it's a bad thing. The good thing is that the program itself, I think, was pretty well hardened so that it could not be changed by this new agenda, the new sort of ESG agenda that was rolled out last week. And I think that preserved the user experience for a lot of the people who attended last week, a lot of the new people in particular. And that those new people probably got as much out of it as they maybe had hoped to. There were some fantastic sessions there. My particular sort of top sessions, I really enjoyed what Phil and Elise did with their competitor segmentation session. That was really good. Really well metered too. The cadence on that was excellent. August had a really good session, boiling down his stuff. Rich Caldwell had a great session that I sat in on as well. And then my other two favorites were, ironically, Eric Littman's panel, but mostly because of John Westberg, who was on there. I popped in at the very tail end because I knew Westberg would be given the hind portion of that time on stage. And I was super proud of him. He actually made me cuss in response to that out loud. And then our own Danny LaFontaine. Danny was up with a client talking about their experience rolling out First Light at a financial services company. And that was really, really cool. Danny and John are kind of the best of us, so to speak. And Elise says there was a mercenary missionary session by some experts too. Can't remember their names though. Well, you can tell us about that in a second. My last big takeaway after demographics though, and Terry, great question. I think it was about the normal demographics, frankly, which I will say is about 20% sort of, jaded veterans like us who've been to 20 skips or more in my case, or 35 in the case of Craig, a lot of sort of the old guard, so to speak, who are at these things, whether we sort of need to be there or not, we're going to show up and do it. We did not do a booth, and maybe I'll ask you about your takeaways on the not doing a booth finding. And Joe, thank you. Joe's number 4 on the interlocutor end. So we're going to wrap this up early, so we've got room to get Joe in. But I think my major takeaway, other than that normal demographics, 80% noobs, 20% jaded veterans, is that, to Elisa's point, there's really, if SCIP's not there to help the newbies kind of figure out what it is they're going to do next, there won't be a 2024. And that's why I wore this t-shirt today, by the way. This is my suggestion to Paul, is if they don't figure this out and get this positioning correct, no one is coming to 2024. With that, Derek, any remarks about sponsorship, booth, etc., and that topic before we bring in our interlocutors a little bit early today?
Yeah, the exhibit hall is always something that I've spent a lot of time in, obviously over the last couple of decades. I was talking with somebody, an attendee from the buy side, as I call it. So, buy side internal corporate practitioner type of persona. I would put myself on the sell side, obviously. And, from the standpoint of buy side, sell side, it felt like it was pretty balanced in demographics. The issue that I had, and I felt underdressed most of last week. And what I mean by that is, it's not because my hat was backwards at certain times. It's not because I was wearing tennis shoes. It's because I didn't have a booth to actually go to during any of these moments of downtime, so to speak, or the exhibit hall frenzy, as we like to say. I think SCIP made a pretty significant unforced error by not forcing those evening receptions, especially into the exhibit hall area. I get it that it was Scottsdale. It wasn't even too hot to be outside, not in a shaded location. That being set aside, 65 to 70%, as I estimate, of the attendees at those networking receptions took what they had and they went outside to network with people, which you can't fault them. But the fact is they weren't mingling amongst the exhibitors and the sponsors of SCIP. And I think that that's a bit of a problem from the standpoint that, if you think about SCIP being a matchmaker, multi-sided marketplace, right? You've got attendees and you've got sponsors, and the sponsors being the money side of that equation, they are counting on some access to that. So, for what it's worth, I missed having a booth. I think it was the right decision based upon what we saw. But at the end of the day, it was, I did feel a little underdressed, I have to be honest.
Excellent. Elise, I'm going to go ahead and promote you to panelist early here. And one last time before we cut the social stream, redeem your POAP. I just redeemed mine for the unthinkable portion of today's show. For those of you who are joining as interlocutors, you'll get an interlocutor POAP, which will be in addition to whatever you might scan during Unspeakable. Elise is out there. It's time to say "Do svidaniya, Rossiyskaya Svet Robotov." Goodbye to the Russian botnets. It's been real. And thank you for tuning in on social media. If you'd like to join the actual bridge, you got to go to openrecon.com and figure out how to sign up. You're all smart, I'm sure, and can figure it out.